Ginho sat in his office, clicking his mouse on the desk. He was clearly tense and restless. He was focused on dealing with the people who were trying to harm their guild. He didn't spare anyone who went against his leader. Once he was done, he let out a sigh of relief. He had finally handled the leader's biggest haters. Just then, Jin-Woo walked into the room and praised Ginho for his work. Ginho was surprised to see his master show up so suddenly. He had disappeared earlier, and now it felt like he appeared out of nowhere. Jin-Woo asked if everything was fine while he was gone. Ginho said yes, but he noticed something odd. Jin-Woo looked a little strange and worn out. Jin-Woo explained that he had just come back from a dungeon. Since they needed funds for the guild, he showed the high-level crystals he brought back. Ginho was thrilled. These crystals meant they could now pay the staff without worrying. But Jin-Woo looked puzzled when Ginho mentioned the workers. Ginho reminded him that he had said before that they needed more people. He recalled that a guild needs at least 3 people, a director, a deputy, and a staff member. But Jin-Woo didn't see the point. He believed it was better to hire people who already had proven themselves. Even so, it was a serious matter, and Jin-Woo didn't want to go deeper into it. Then Ginho said there was another issue they needed to solve immediately: the name of the guild. Jin-Woo hadn't even thought about it, though it was one of the most important things. Ginho offered suggestions like Song Yu Guild to honor both founders, or Yu Sun Guild, though he didn't like that his name would come second. Then he tried mixing parts of their names, maybe Wu Guild or Zhang. He thought those sounded all right, but Jin-Woo suddenly said, "How about Solo?" Ginho became a little uneasy. Jin-Woo was known as a hunter who always worked alone. Ginho turned away, unsure if it was a joke or not. Maybe his mentor wasn't as perfect as he seemed. Perhaps there really were things even he couldn't do. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Both of them looked toward it, unsure who it could be. When they opened it, someone asked if this was the office of Jin-Woo's Hunter Guild. It was Hunter Cha. Jin-Woo asked what brought her there, and she said she wanted to join the guild. A few minutes later, they were sitting on the couch. Jin-Woo asked how she knew about the guild. She said that he had asked her to join, but Jin-Woo didn't remember ever doing that. Then he asked if the association or the president had sent her. She didn't know what that had to do with anything. Jin-Woo continued. Maybe Hunter Choi kicked her out of her guild, but she denied it. Jin-Woo didn't understand her reason for joining, and when she heard the guild was called Solo, she was stunned. She couldn't believe that was the actual name. When Jin-Woo asked if she had a problem with the name, Ginho quickly jumped in. He explained that Jin-Woo had jokingly called it Solo and that it wasn't a final decision. Later, Jin-Woo turned away, trying to stay calm and understand what was going on. He looked at Hunter Cha closely, her breathing, heartbeat, and expression. She was clearly hiding her real reason for coming, but she wasn't very good at it. Jin-Woo wondered why she wanted to join so badly. As far as he knew, Lady Cha had awakened just 2 years ago, and her current guild contract hadn't ended yet. She said she could pay the penalty to leave early. Hearing that, Jin-Woo questioned if she was really willing to pay the fine just to join them. He offered her a reward matching her level, but she said it didn't matter to her. Jin-Woo began to wonder what her real goal was. Why would she be so eager to join despite the cost? Meanwhile, Hunter Cha was still thinking. She wasn't sure whether to tell the truth. After all, if she said what she was thinking, people might just call her crazy. She had noticed something unusual. Jin-Woo didn't have the typical smell of mana users. Instead, he gave off a pleasant scent, which made her curious. He had interrupted Leon's press conference and attracted a lot of haters online. But when she learned he was actually an S-rank hunter, she realized he wasn't as bad as she first believed. Still, she had tried to convince herself that someone like him wouldn't even notice her in this dark, cruel world. But in a moment of real danger, she finally saw hope. A flood of fear, pain, and the feeling of being close to death swept over her like cold water. When she woke up from that long, dark state, the president of the Hunter Association was sitting beside her, asking if she was okay. She didn't even know where she was at first, but they told her she was in a helicopter heading to the association. Once they arrived, the president planned to send her straight to the hospital. She asked if Hunter Jin-Woo had also been at the raid, and when the president shook his head, she realized it hadn't been a dream. She had truly been on the brink of death. That moment made her think, what if something like that happened again during a raid? What would she do? Now, she was sitting on a couch across from the man who had saved her life. Her heart felt heavy, her mouth dry. She wanted to say she wished he'd stay by her side for the rest of her life, but she was too embarrassed. Her cheeks turned red, and Jin-Woo couldn't understand what was going on with her. He could tell she was hiding something, but he didn't know what. Still, he began to wonder, could she have planned all of this? Finally, he asked her what her answer was. Huntress Cha clenched her fists. She felt awkward and unsure, but part of her desperately wanted to say it. Jane Wu turned to his friend and started explaining how difficult things were in the hunter world. So much so that even someone like Cha came looking for peace in their guild. She was only about 22 or 23, a young hunter carrying a heavy weight of responsibility. And she had been badly injured during that last raid. Jane Wu sighed and said honestly that, to join the guild, one had to pass a test. It hadn't been mentioned in the letter, probably because the vice president forgot. It was a recent requirement. Jane Wu asked Ginho to head downstairs and get something to eat and drink. Once he left, Huntress Cha asked about the test. Jane Wu noticed her determination and told her the test involved defeating one of his shadow soldiers. She took a deep breath and said she was ready. In fact, she had already decided who her opponent would be. He told her he would select the strongest shadow warrior just for her. Huntress Cha was excited to prove herself and stood up right away, asking when the test would begin. Jane Wu said they'd start immediately and thought the Hunter Association's training hall would be a good place for it. But then he remembered that it would take some time to get there. So he decided to use his shadow exchange ability. This skill allowed him to instantly switch places with any of his shadow soldiers. However, once used, it couldn't be used again for 3 hours, and the cooldown depended on its level. As they were about to head out the door, Jane Wu told her they didn't need to go far. She looked confused, so he explained there was an easier way. But for it to work, she had to stand closer to him, if she didn't mind. When he pulled her close, she blushed. Then he activated the shadow exchange, and within seconds the ground seemed to pull them down as if the shadows themselves were swallowing them. Right after they disappeared, Ginho returned to the room with food. He was ready to say that he brought something to eat so they could talk peacefully, but instead of the two hunters, the room was now empty. He saw a huge orc standing in front of him. Shocked, he wondered where it had come from. But the orc didn't look confused at all. It calmly reached out, took the food from his hands, and began to eat. Meanwhile, Jane Wu and Huntress Cha had arrived at the Hunter Association's training room. As soon as they reached, she couldn't believe how they got there so quickly. Jane Wu smiled. His guess was correct. His skill worked like a portal. Not only could it teleport him, but it could also bring others along. A shadow gateway would appear on the ground, and wherever it pointed became the exit. It usually took 3 hours before he could use this skill again, but it had great potential. It could connect faraway places with ease. Jane Wu told her it was time to begin the test, but then Huntress Cha suddenly said she had forgotten her weapon. Jane Wu jokingly mentioned the pickaxe he had seen her holding back when they were fighting high-level orcs in the dungeon. She blushed and said that wasn't her real weapon. He laughed and said he was just teasing. She said it was fine. She'd find something in the training hall's warehouse. Once there, she opened the door and started checking the weapons. Since training happened regularly, the association had set up a large storage area nearby. It didn't have the best weapons, but they were good enough for practice. After browsing for a while, she chose a sword that felt right and said she was ready. Jane Wu commented that it looked like a basic version and asked if she had ever used one like it. She admitted it wasn't perfect, but added that the monster wouldn't care if she was comfortable or not. What mattered was being able to fight. John Wu was impressed by her mindset. Still, he felt an ordinary shadow soldier wouldn't be enough against her. She might defeat one too easily. So he summoned his commander-in-chief, Igris, explaining that he was the most skilled swordsman among his shadow warriors. The huntress asked how long the fight would last. Jane Wu answered, "Until either you or my soldier gives up." Although he had promised to bring out his strongest, Jane Wu felt that summoning General Bear could be too much. He might end up scaring her. Igris was a better match. As she got ready, Jane Wu noticed the sword she was holding again. He realized she could handle any weapon. Quietly, he pulled out the Demon King's sword, handed it to Igris, and told him to use it in the fight. The duel began. Igris charged forward, sword in hand. As soon as he swung it, a powerful lightning strike hit the floor. But just as Jin-Woo expected, the huntress was incredibly fast. A normal person wouldn't have survived such an attack, but she fought on evenly. Meanwhile, the president of the association was in his office going over paperwork. He glanced out the window and saw lights on in the training room. That struck him as odd. No one had booked the hall that day. He quickly asked his staff to send him the live security feed from the training room. When they checked, they were shocked to see two hunters fighting there. They couldn't figure out how they had even gotten inside. Then the president remembered the helicopter ride when the huntress had asked if Jin-Woo had come to the raid. He smiled, finally connecting the dots. He told his staff to turn off the CCTV feed from the training room and mark it as an inspection in the logs. Back in his office, the floor shook from the impact of powerful blows coming from the training hall. He realized that young hunters like them were the future, full of strength and potential to bring people together. In the training room, something unexpected happened. Jin-Woo was surprised to see Igris get knocked back, crashing into a wall. Huntress Cha stood confidently, saying, "So this is your most skilled swordsman? Impressive." She remembered he had promised to bring out the strongest shadow warrior for this fight. She stood tall, full of confidence, and asked Jin-Woo once again to summon his strongest warrior. He hesitated and warned her. It could be dangerous. But she insisted. She wanted to face him again. That's when Jin-Woo realized something. She must have seen footage of General Burr before. Even so, he started summoning the powerful shadow. Just to be sure, he looked at her and asked one last time, "Are you absolutely sure?" General Burr, even as a shadow, was weaker than when he was alive. But he had been born for one thing, killing hunters. The odds were clearly against Huntress Cha. As Burr emerged from the shadows, he looked to Jin-Woo and asked, "What are my orders?" Jin-Woo told him, "Fight her, but don't let her get hurt." At that very moment, Burr let out a deafening roar. The sound was so powerful that every light bulb in the training room began to shake. Then they shattered, plunging the entire room into darkness. Huntress Cha was stunned. The sheer pressure of Burr's presence was overwhelming. She couldn't believe Jin-Woo had fought this monster alone. But before she could react, Jin-Woo suddenly ordered, "Stop!" He turned to Burr and warned him, "If she gets even a scratch, I won't forgive you." Burr, still glowing with red energy, nodded. "As you wish, my king." Huntress Cha didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. She was ready to fight. But suddenly, one of Burr's soldiers appeared behind her, just like last time. She saw it coming and struck quickly with her sword. The soldier, however, blocked the attack with ease. The order was clear. Burr had to defeat the enemy, not by brute strength, but by using superiority to break their will. And so the fight began. Huntress Cha charged in, slashing with precision. She knew it was too early for a decisive hit, but she kept attacking, waiting for an opening. Burr avoided her attacks with graceful movement, sometimes floating above the ground. Then in a flash, he got close to her and released a sound wave that stunned her for a moment. He grabbed her shoulder and threw her back. Jin-Woo watched closely. He thought the test had gone far enough. "This should be enough," he said quietly. But the huntress wasn't done. She stood up again. "I can still fight," she insisted. Jin-Woo was confused. What was she thinking? He had never seen someone so determined, even when the gap in strength was obvious. Burr wasn't like other shadow soldiers. Even without emotions, he was still a living weapon, and Jin-Woo could feel that his bloodlust was rising. Burr was struggling to hold himself back. On the battlefield, when someone faces death, they instinctively know whether they're the predator or the prey, and once you sense a predator, the body screams, "Run or die." But she didn't run. She kept dodging every strike Burr threw at her. Then suddenly she began her sword dance technique. She moved like a whirlwind, striking with elegance and power. She aimed for a heavy blow, but when her sword collided with Burr's armor, it shattered. She was out of mana. She had one last move left, her ultimate skill, a strike called Dream. She charged, her sword glowing with light, and pierced Burr's body with stunning speed and force. Jin-Woo's eyes widened. Something deep inside Burr had awakened. A command, buried since birth, echoed in his mind. Eliminate all threats. He couldn't ignore it. The light faded, and red rage burned in Burr's eyes. His aura turned fiery, and his fury was visible. He was about to destroy her. The huntress had nowhere left to run. Jin-Woo screamed, "Stop!" But Burr had already launched the final attack. In that split second, Jin-Woo moved faster than anyone expected. He leapt forward, placing himself between Bear and the huntress, blocking the deadly blow just in time. Jin-Woo looked straight at Burr. "I told you to stop. Why didn't you listen?" he said sharply as the dust began to settle around them. Then he turned to Huntress Cha, still confused and frustrated. "Why would you risk so much for this? Why put your life on the line just to join our guild?" Burr, now kneeling on the floor, looked ashamed. He lowered his head and begged for forgiveness from his king. But Jin-Woo only sighed. He looked back at Huntress Cha. "This whole test, it's just a way to step into the unknown. Everyone here is figuring things out. Why would you push yourself this far? What's driving you to take such a dangerous leap?" She stayed silent. Jin-Woo stared at her, trying to understand. "Is it me?" he asked, half joking, half curious. "Is that why?" She looked at him for a moment. Then with a calm but clear voice, she answered, "Yes, it's because of you." Meanwhile, at the American Hunters Association, a man and a woman stood before a powerful-looking hunter, apologizing. But he waved them off coldly. "I didn't call you here to hear apologies," he said. "I want to know how this happened." According to Sellner's recent analysis, Hunter Jin-Woo had been classified as one of the kings. This was no small claim, and the man seated before them couldn't believe what he was hearing. He demanded clarification. Mrs. Sellner, standing with calm confidence, explained further. "When someone awakens," she said, "they connect to a power from the other side. That connection creates a visible energy flow, something I can see." She continued, "Some awakened ones shine brightly, almost like diamonds. I call them kings. But Jin-Woo, he's different. When I looked into his eyes, I didn't see light. I saw darkness." The man blinked in confusion. "Are you saying he's evil?" Sellner shook her head. "I'm not speaking about good or evil. This isn't about his nature. It's about where his power comes from." She explained that unlike most awakened beings who draw power from external sources, Jin-Woo doesn't rely on those channels. Instead, he draws from within, tapping into an endless reservoir of energy inside himself. "In other words," she said, "his power is infinite." Those words made the seated man rise to his feet. "Good work," he told her. Then to the others he added, "We're going down to the 24th basement floor." Another man followed, asking where they were headed. The first man replied, "To see something that's been waiting for years." As the elevator descended, they discussed alternatives. "If Sellner can't help us," one man said, "then we'll need another way." He recalled the first time they'd faced in this ranked dungeon, a disaster that shook the entire western U.S. It had been brutal. Out of all the elite hunters sent in, each one bought with massive contracts, only 5 made it out alive. Those 5 were given state-level authority, later called national-level hunters. Among the threats in that dungeon was a dragon named Kesh, whose flames were said to never die out. It had torn through entire teams of hunters like paper. As they neared the bottom floor, the man muttered, "I'd believe it if you told me that monster left something behind." The elevator door opened. Inside, a runestone lay resting in a secure chamber, left behind from the body of Reed. 8 years had passed since his death, and none of the national-level hunters had claimed it. But the stone remained, waiting quietly in that cold, dark place. And now, it was ready to give one more gift to America. Back in Korea, Jin-Woo stood silently in front of a mirror at his home. He looked at himself with thoughtful eyes. So much had changed. He could feel it. He had grown stronger, much stronger. As Jin-Woo looked at himself in the mirror, he started wondering, was it really just him, or had everyone changed like this after their rebirth? People on the street seemed different too. Maybe the rebirth process had fixed all physical flaws, even the ones people didn't realize they had. Curious, he barged into his sister's room and asked her bluntly, "Hey, what do you think of me?" She blinked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "You know, my charm, as a guy." She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "Why are you suddenly acting like you're hot stuff?" At that moment, their younger brother came in and started annoying her. She groaned and snapped, "Honestly, you're just a freeloader living in this house." Jin-Woo chuckled. "Thanks for the honest review." She kicked him in response, but he laughed and warned her, "Careful, you'll hurt yourself. Did you forget I'm an S-rank hunter now? I've got some skills, you know." She fired back. Yeah, and I'm first in my class at school. Then Jin-Woo casually mentioned that he was thinking about starting his own guild. His sister immediately jumped on the idea, teasing. So I have to listen to the boss now? He asked her opinion on a name. How about El Solo? She burst out laughing. Seriously? That's so weird. You're not even solo. You summoned those black soldiers, remember? Jin-Woo paused, realizing she had a point. True. What would you call it? His sister smirked and said, Call it Ain. A 4 level up. Also, it's my name upside down. Plus, it sounds cool. That night over at Hunter Cha's apartment, she lay in bed replaying everything she had said to Jin-Woo. Embarrassed, she groaned and hid her face under a pillow. Why did I say that? It sounded like a confession. Is that really what I meant? She turned red, frustrated with herself. He probably thinks I'm crazy now. But then her thoughts softened. Still, he saved my life. Of course I'm curious about him. Trying to calm herself down, she remembered the moment she nearly died, and the warmth of a hand pulling her back. That was when Hunter M. Ben used his healing ability to save her. And as her soul drifted in that moment, he had told her something. Tell Jin-Woo to be careful. That power of his. The memory came back clearly now. She had met Hunter Ben then. It wasn't a dream. The next day, in one of the top guilds, members were discussing a newly opened dungeon. The atmosphere was tense. The permit might be hard to get, one hunter said. It's ranked above average. You think it's S rank? Another asked. Nah, it's listed as A rank. But who knows? It could change. The guild was facing a tough decision. If the dungeon turned out to be S rank, they'd be stuck inside. But if they gave up too early, and the dungeon wasn't S-class after all, they'd lose face, and the credit would go to other more famous guilds. As one of the biggest guilds in the country, failure wasn't an option. It could get ugly. The guild members sat around thinking about their next move. Sure, they had some strong hunters, but they still lacked something crucial, an S-rank hunter. And without one, they were easily overshadowed by more well-known guilds. Some of the hunters believed that not having an S-rank member wasn't a huge deal, until one of the female hunters walked up with a suggestion. Why don't we form an alliance? The two men considered her proposal. It actually made sense. She explained that handling the dungeon alone was risky, but other guilds might have already joined forces behind the scenes. Still, they weren't sure if those guilds would be open to an alliance with them. Then she added, what if we invited just one person? It could change everything. One of the hunters raised an eyebrow. Why not just head for a lower-ranked dungeon then? What's the point of all this? Then it hit him. He realized exactly who she was talking about. Jin-Woo. Teaming up with someone like him would be complicated. Sure, it would get them attention, but not necessarily the kind they wanted. With someone like Jin-Woo involved, all eyes would be on them, and the pressure would skyrocket. Still, one thing was certain. Under Jin-Woo's command, their squad would probably return alive. The man turned to his teammates. Anyone know what Jin-Woo's been up to lately? Another replied, only thing I heard was that he cleared a highway dungeon recently. He was about to look up Jin-Woo's contact info, but someone stopped him. No point. A guy like him doesn't handle things over the phone. Meanwhile, back in Jin-Woo's office, Jin-Ho was still set on naming the guild Ain. Sounds good, doesn't it? He grinned. Jin-Woo nodded. Yeah, let's go with that. Just definitely not solo. Then he asked, so what's next? We still need more members. Jin-Ho thought for a moment. What about that girl? Cha? How'd that go yesterday? Jin-Woo shook his head. It didn't work out. She's not the right fit. Jin-Ho seemed a little disappointed. But she's young, talented, and a total beauty. I really thought she'd be a great addition. Then he started thinking out loud. You know, whoever we bring in should already have a hunter's license. They don't need to worry about guild politics. Just trust us completely. That's when an idea clicked in his head. Jin-Ho's eyes lit up. He knew exactly who he wanted to invite. But before he could say anything, there was a knock at the door. Jin-Woo got up, half expecting it to be Hunter Cha again. But it wasn't. Instead, 3 men from the association and the night guild stood at the door. A few moments later, they were all seated in his office. One of the men explained that they'd been reviewing a dungeon gate from a video recording. The gate was massive, And while dungeon size doesn't always match its danger level, in this case, it did. Jin-Woo asked them directly, "So, it's an S-rank dungeon?" The representative hesitated. "Not confirmed yet, but this is the biggest dungeon ever recorded in Busan's territory, and the association already rejected the guild's application to raid it because they don't have an S-rank hunter." That's when they made their offer. "We want you to join the raid. If you do, we'll give you 20% of the profit. That's double the usual 10% cut." But Jin-Woo didn't even flinch. "Make it 50-50. They were stunned. One of them tried to negotiate. "How about 40 to 60? But Jin-Woo wasn't budging. "No bargaining. I'll only do it if I'm accepted as a full member of the raid team. We've already decided on a guild name. We're not just guests anymore." The man from the Night Guild sat back, realizing Jin-Woo wasn't someone they could push around. He offered one last statement. "You'll take command then?" Jin-Woo smiled slightly. "Count on it." The hunter warned them that the dungeon had already been open for a while. They needed to move quickly. The raid was scheduled for the next morning. Jin-Woo replied calmly, "I already have plans tonight. Let's meet tomorrow." As he said this, he subtly tied a shadow to the man's leg as insurance, making sure he could track them. "Don't worry, I won't be late." But just then, the man looked down, puzzled. "Weird. I could have sworn your shadow just moved." Before Jin-Woo could answer, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and saw an unexpected caller. "Sorry, guys, I need to take this." "Wait here," he said, stepping outside. As he answered, he heard a familiar voice. His mom. He was surprised. "You got your own phone?" She laughed. "I wanted to hear your voice right away." He smiled and reassured her. "You're not interrupting anything important." He stood near the entrance of his building, and while talking, he thought about asking his mom to go out to dinner together tonight. But even as he spoke to her, he was waiting on another call from someone else. The next morning, near the massive gate in Busan, the streets were swarming with hunters, all dressed in flashy armor. One of the hunters from the previous day checked his phone. It was already 11 a.m. They were supposed to move out in 5 minutes. He had barely convinced Jin-Woo to join, and really hoped he wouldn't be late. Elsewhere in another city, Jin-Ho stood outside his house, looking at the gloomy weather. He wondered if his sister had taken an umbrella. Then he realized it was time to leave. He put on a confident smile and prepared to use his charm and social skills. He had work to do. At the same time, far from the gate, 3 high school students were walking down the school hallway, grumbling about having to help the art teacher. They were supposed to bring in some statues from one of the unused classrooms. "How many statues are we supposed to move?" one asked. "6, another replied, "and they're all in this room." A third student groaned. "Even if we carry 2 each, we'll still have to go back and forth." When they opened the door to the classroom, they were met with dust, cobwebs, and grime. The place hadn't been cleaned in ages. As they stepped in, they noticed the statues weren't damaged or worn. They looked almost untouched. But then, something strange caught one of the students' eyes. "Hey, what's that?" At the back of the room, a gate had appeared out of nowhere. Another student walked up to it. "Relax. The gate's still closed. Hunters are the only ones who can go through these things, and no one's supposed to come out for at least a week." But the third student whispered nervously, "Didn't they say no one was supposed to be in this building?" Suddenly, a massive green hand shot out of the gate, grabbing one of the boys by the head and lifting him off the ground. "Help me!" the boy screamed. His friends froze in horror as an enormous orc stepped through the gate. Within minutes, the classroom was silent. Every student lay dead on the floor. A supreme orc emerged, towering and brutal. This creature wasn't just strong, it had hunting instincts far beyond human comprehension. Further, though it lacked intelligence, its skill and savagery made it a top predator. The stench of blood and flesh stirred something deep inside it, but it held back. This was only the beginning. These orcs were scouts, meant to observe and prepare, not slaughter. Somewhere nearby, hidden in the shadows, a hunter who had been tracking movements for weeks stood still. He didn't need to search. His instincts told him his prey had arrived. The dungeon stretched before them, its structure resembling something ancient, like a citadel, imposing and foreboding. One of the orcs, a brute of immense power, growled that it was time to begin the hunt. The other orcs should call for their brethren to join the attack. His plan was simple: eliminate the humans and seize the fortress, then begin the real hunt. but first he would clear the path ahead. As he walked down the corridor, he saw a group of students at the end. One student turned and noticed the massive creature approaching. She froze, her mind racing to understand what it was, but before anyone could react, the Supreme Orc attacked, mowing down the nearest students. Meanwhile, Jin-Woo stood in front of the gate, observing it with a mix of awe and caution. The gate seemed even more monstrous in person than it had appeared in the video. He noticed a collection team on the right and an extraction team on the left. Among the attackers were 38 ranked hunters and 20 A-rank hunters, plus a significant number of B-rank hunters. No surprise, given that this guild was known for having a large number of A-rank hunters. Suddenly, a commotion broke out as several hunters began approaching Jin-Woo, asking questions. They were all curious about how he had summoned the Dark Warriors. "Is it magic? Summoning magic?" they asked in rapid-fire succession. Jin-Woo was overwhelmed by their questions and couldn't respond to all of them at once. Before the situation could get out of hand, a woman stepped forward, telling the others to calm down. "Don't you see you're bothering him with all your questions?" she scolded. She introduced herself as Yang Rim, the head healer from the elite attack squad of the Knights Guild. She believed that, as two of the most responsible people there, Jin-Woo and she should work together. Jin-Woo turned around to address the hunter he had spoken to earlier in his office. The man stepped forward and began explaining that the raid would be led by him, not Jin-Woo. There was a brief moment of confusion as the hunters questioned why this was the case. "Why not Jin-Woo?" one of them asked. "Isn't he supposed to lead?" The leader responded calmly. "Jin-Woo will ensure our safety, but we need someone to lead this raid. He'll have our backs." But the hunters didn't seem pleased. "Do you really think we're so weak that we need someone to protect us?" one of them asked angrily. Another hunter challenged Jin-Woo's leadership, suggesting that their guild had strong members capable of handling things on their own. The leader, attempting to ease the tension, said, "It's not about weakness. It's about working together to ensure success." Jin-Woo nodded in agreement. He saw the leader's point, but also recognized the underlying pride of the hunters. When the time came, the leader signaled that it was time to begin, and the raid started. At the same time, the Hunters Association received an urgent call. A girl from the school was on the line, frantic and scared. "There are monsters in our school. The dungeon's open," she cried. The dispatcher at the association quickly calmed her. "Stay calm. Help is on the way." The girl, hiding in a restroom with a friend, explained that her friend was already dead. The dispatcher reassured her, asking how many monsters were nearby. The girl couldn't say for sure. Then the line went silent, and the dispatcher heard screams. The girl's voice shook as she said, "I'm going to die." "Don't panic. The hunters are on their way. You're not alone," the dispatcher urged. The girl was quiet for a moment, then described the monsters. "They have a human-like body and green skin," she said, suddenly recalling. "They're orcs, I think. I've seen them on TV." As she spoke, the orc in question had already entered the restroom, its massive gray form looming over her. The orc continued to move toward the student hiding in the restroom. Suddenly, a loud scream echoed through the communication line, and the connection was abruptly cut off. The dispatcher, still on the line, yelled for the girl to escape as quickly as possible. She could smell blood. The last thing they heard was the girl screaming for help as her phone fell to the ground. Meanwhile, the students who had managed to escape the school were horrified by the scene. Blood was splattered across the walls, and the chaos outside was just as bad. Panic set in as they began to run, but one student stopped, asking her friend to wait. Her friend was still at the school. "The hunters will take care of it," he said urgently. "We need to get out of here now." They barely managed to escape a different floor before an orc appeared, declaring that the hunt wasn't over. There were still many hiding upstairs, and the orcs planned to clear every floor, killing everyone in sight. On the floor above, some students had barricaded themselves in a classroom. Armed with whatever they could find, school chairs, mops, they prepared for a fight, but their barricade didn't stand a chance. The door flew open, and a massive orc, drenched in blood, stood before them. One student tried to flee, but the orc, sensing another hiding behind the wall, swung his massive axe, smashing through the barrier and sealing the student's fate. At the same time, Jin-Woo's sister, trapped in a corner of a classroom, squeezed her eyes shut, hoping her brother would come and save her. The fear was overwhelming. Then a voice shouted, "No!" One of the girls, though not a ranked hunter, spoke up, trying to keep calm. Stay calm, I can help. Jin-Woo's sister turned, recognizing the strong magic emanating from the girl. The orc looming over them, ready to strike, stopped in its tracks. It seemed to sense something powerful in the girl, but before the situation could escalate further, a shadowy figure appeared. It was the shadow soldier Jin-Woo had summoned. The shadow soldier, a massive figure, attacked the orc with great force, sending it flying into the air. Jin-Woo's sister was awestruck. This was her brother's protection in action. At the same time, in the dungeon, Jin-Woo and his team were dealing with the monsters. The hunters who had entered the dungeon with him were stunned as they encountered a two-headed orc. The leader immediately took charge, calling for the group to focus. They were up against a dangerous foe. The massive two-headed orc saw the hunters and roared in fury, swinging its huge axe toward them. But one hunter, undaunted, activated his skill and summoned a protective barrier just in time to absorb the impact of the orc's blow. There was a massive explosion when the axe collided with the barrier, and the hunter's strength held the pressure. As the orc reeled, the other hunters quickly sprang into action. One hunter, with agility and speed, scaled the orc's giant axe and charged toward its heads. With expert precision, he struck the orc's eyes, blinding it. The other hunters quickly followed suit, launching their attacks and incapacitating the monster. Then the mages behind the hunters unleashed their spells, a massive lightning bolt and a barrage of fire spells. The two-headed orc collapsed, defeated. However, the leader knew this raid wasn't over yet. This dungeon was full of surprises, and things weren't going to be easy. The leader turned to Jin-Woo. "Do you know what we're truly up against here?" he asked. Jin-Woo, unwavering, replied calmly, "They're Graveguard. If this was a normal dungeon boss, it would have been over by now." There were no issues at first, but the moment a two-headed ogre appeared at the entrance, it became clear. This place was filled with the undead. As soon as the hunters remembered this, the undead showed up, making everyone nervous. They immediately began asking their leader what to do. Should they fight or stay back? But then something strange happened. The undead suddenly acted differently and stopped moving. The hunters were confused. Why did these creatures run away instead of attacking, especially when they usually go after people without hesitation? It seemed like they were scared of something. Jin-Woo, standing at the back, also noticed this and felt something strange. Just then, he told the hunters he had urgent matters and needed to leave. The leaders didn't understand and told him they might not survive without him. Jin-Woo replied that he knew the risks, but he would call someone they could trust, his friend. Still confused, the leaders watched as Jin-Woo summoned a familiar figure, his general ant. They didn't recognize it at first, but it was the same ant from the island. Jin-Woo explained that since everyone seemed to know what was happening, there was no need to explain more. He handed over the responsibility to the general, telling him to protect the people and let anyone not part of their group do as they wish. Hearing this, the general ant shouted joyfully, excited to have some fun. The nearby hunters realized they were going to follow him. A girl next to Jin-Woo called out to her teammate, "Mr. Jin-Woo." Soon reinforcements arrived, about 20 ants. Despite this, the leaders and a healer girl tried to stop Jin-Woo, saying he had summoned monsters for no reason. Jin-Woo turned to them seriously and said he could call them back if they preferred, but this was better than doing nothing. After that, no one argued. They just agreed. While standing in line, Jin-Woo checked how much longer until his skill was ready again. 1 hour and 42 minutes left. He couldn't understand why this was happening now. Without wasting time, Jin-Woo started running toward the dungeon exit. As he sprinted, he realized the signals from the soldiers protecting his sister hadn't stopped, and he had a bad feeling. Suddenly, he saw a large group of undead soldiers in front of him. He yelled at them to move. Unexpectedly, they all kneeled down as if worshipping him. Jin-Woo didn't understand why. Maybe it was because of his necromancer powers, but he had no time to think. He quickly summoned his dragon, Kaisel, who appeared beneath him. Jin-Woo climbed on, and as he flew out of the dungeon, he immediately headed toward his sister. Everyone watching from the portal was surprised to see him flying away on his dragon. Jin-Woo told the dragon to use all its power to reach his sister faster. Then he activated a skill that boosted all Shadow Soldiers' power by 50%. Meanwhile, the orcs guarding his sister were fighting other orcs that had attacked. It was an intense battle. The green orcs lost, and the disciples watching were amazed as the powerful shadow orcs defeated the regular ones. They realized the monsters were actually protecting one of the female disciples, Jin-Woo's sister. She stood behind one of the shadow orcs and asked if her brother had arrived. The orc stopped her and pointed his thumb toward the window, signaling he was on his way. At that moment, the final barrier inside the building broke. An orc sitting on a throne listened to one of his followers, who said that now, the leader of the Red Knife tribe, Grat, could not be stopped. But another orc warned Grat that some orcs were helping humans. 3 of them were even at the school. This made Grat furious. For him, the strongest warriors being soft was unacceptable. So he picked up his giant axe, determined to deal with it personally. It was time for a massacre. Back in the other dungeon, the ants who were fighting on the human side were loudly roaring as they defeated their enemies. The hunters watching all this from a distance were unsure. Should they stay or should they leave? They were scared. What if the ants suddenly turned on them? But the leader, known as Mountain, understood that there was no turning back now. They had to finish the raid. Even if they wanted to stop, the reporters outside wouldn't let them go easily. Some hunters were nervous, but quitting wasn't an option. Just then, Ant Bear appeared suddenly near the leader, startling her. She was about to say something, but the ant vanished instantly and reappeared at his original position. With incredible speed, he rushed off again. On the way, he threw something on the ground near the leader's feet. When the leader looked down while sitting on the ground, she saw a large ant staring back at her. After a moment, the ant turned away and walked off with the rest of his army. Other hunters rushed over and asked if she was all right and what they should do. Follow the ants or stay here. The leader said everything was fine. When the hunters looked down, they saw the severed head of a death knight lying on the ground. They were shocked. That ant had taken down a powerful monster with a single strike. His strength was unbelievable. Then the leader smiled. She realized something important. No one really knew how valuable high-level magic crystals could be. That meant they couldn't leave just yet. Looking up, she saw all the hunters heading toward where the ants had gone. Meanwhile, at the school, a new fight had broken out between the orcs and those inside. A female orc named Grower appeared, standing behind her fellow orcs. Her guardian orcs stood with her, all shouting her name. Grower! Grower began to boast that her body was covered in tattoos, each one representing a battle she had won and how many enemies she had defeated. Looking at her opponents, she admitted they had taken down quite a few enemies too, but she believed that was all they could manage. She raised her giant sword and told the higher orcs to enjoy the battle while she handled these enemies herself. She swung her blade hard, but another orc blocked the strike. Grower didn't stop. She used even more strength and cut the shadow orc in half. To her shock, the shadow orc quickly regenerated. It was magic. No matter how many times she attacked, it was useless. She thought about killing hundreds, even thousands. But then she began hearing voices in her head. Voices urging her to kill all humans. These voices grew louder and stronger with each passing moment. She realized she needed to finish off the shadow orcs quickly before the voices took full control of her. Grower figured out that someone was behind all this. Someone controlling the orcs with magic. She believed it was the girl hiding among her guards. If they could capture her, the magic might stop. But because the orcs were constantly regenerating, they needed to move fast and take her down before the regeneration could happen again. At that moment, the last remaining shadow orc managed to grab the 2 other orcs, leaving Jin-Woo's sister exposed and unprotected. Suddenly, another creature appeared, grabbed her head, and whispered that he had always known it was her. He could sense her magic clearly. Just as he was about to finish her off, he felt something coming from the distance. His hands began to tremble. Whatever was coming scared him so much that he let go of Jin-Woo's sister, and she fell to the ground. Her friend ran up to her, asking if she was okay. The orc who had been quietly observing suddenly felt a terrifying presence approaching. His instincts screamed danger, and he began to tremble. Just then, the leader of the Red Knives, Grur, ordered his subordinates to get down immediately. At that exact moment, a loud explosion shook the room, and a cloud of dust filled the air, making everyone cough. Someone had burst into the room. Jin-Woo had finally arrived just in time. He rushed to his sister, placed a hand on her head, and gently told her she was safe now. All the orcs instinctively stepped back. Grur looked ahead and saw a large dragon along with a strange hunter who radiated an overwhelming power. Grur began introducing himself, claiming he was the leader of the Red Knives. But before he could finish speaking, Jin-Woo pointed his finger at him and told him to be quiet and wait. He hugged his sister, apologized for arriving late, and said she was safe now. Then he looked toward the other students and asked if they were okay. They all said yes, and Sonia, who stood nearby, said she was fine too. But then Jin-Woo noticed something alarming, a red mark on his sister's face from when the orc had grabbed her. His expression changed instantly. Furious, he called out his shadow commander, Igris, and told him to protect his sister. He also summoned more soldiers and ordered them to get the children out of the school safely. Nearby orcs began to panic. They sensed danger. Jin-Woo noticed their movement and told them firmly to stay still and wait their turn. Slowly, the students began exiting the school, climbing onto the dragon waiting outside. One of the orcs asked how Jin-Woo could control such strong warriors and how he even knew their language. But the only thing that orc saw was a hunter burning with so much power that it felt like he could destroy them all in seconds. Realizing he wouldn't get any answers, the orc, along with the others, charged at Jin-Woo. But Jin-Woo didn't move. He waited as they got closer. One orc swung at him, but Jin-Woo caught him between just 2 fingers. The orc let out a scream of pain. In just a few moments, the orc collapsed, smashed into the rocks below. Then Jin-Woo finished him off with a single powerful kick. Even after watching their comrade die, the other 2 orcs tried to run away. But Jin-Woo used his ruler's authority skill, lifting them into the air. With a squeeze of his hand, both orcs were crushed like meat. Seeing this, the remaining orcs in the room screamed and charged at him all at once. But Jin-Woo wasn't going to wait around. With his bare hands, he tore through them one by one. Within seconds, they were all defeated. Only the leader was left, standing frozen in the corner, unable to believe what had just happened. As he tried to speak, Jin-Woo grabbed his head and slammed him against the wall. While holding him there, Jin-Woo looked down the corridor the orc had come from and saw students lying injured, bleeding on the ground. He turned the other way and saw the same thing. Furious, he asked, "Why are you killing people like this?" The orc mumbled something, as if haunted by voices in his head. Jin-Woo asked again, "What about me? Do you want to kill me too?" The orc only begged for mercy. Jin-Woo stared into his eyes and heard the same voice the orc did. Tears ran down the orc's face. Jin-Woo realized these orcs didn't even see him as human. A blade began forming in Jin-Woo's other hand. He finally spoke, saying, "It doesn't matter anymore. I'll let you live, but don't expect it to be pleasant." Meanwhile, back at the main dungeon gate, where many hunters from the Night Guild were gathered, a healer tried to stop an ant soldier from tearing apart monsters. She pulled on his clothes and tried to explain how expensive vampire soul crystals were. But the ant ignored her and kept devouring the monsters. In her panic, she got hurt. As she looked up, she saw the ant keep eating that vampire. Suddenly, the general ant rushed over to her, stretched out his large arm, and healed her instantly. Her wounds vanished in seconds. Surprised, she thanked him, realizing he had healing magic. She couldn't believe it. How could a shadow creature have stronger healing powers than her? But then she remembered, this wasn't just any ant. He was a general, leading an army of other powerful ants. The group began moving toward the end of the hallway. At the very end, they came to a door. It slowly creaked open. Behind the door stood the boss of the dungeon. He looked ready for battle. When the hunters saw him and the guards behind him, they froze. It was an arch, one of the most dangerous types of dungeon bosses. No guild had ever been able to defeat one before. Thanks to the arrival of a high-level hunter, the situation didn't turn into a full-scale disaster. But now, a new threat was heading their way, an army of the undead. The leader quickly shouted to close the doors immediately, because the enemies that weren't eaten by the ants had come back to life and were now charging toward them. The mage girl quickly activated her sacred defense skill, forming a protective barrier around everyone. But the leader realized they were completely surrounded, and without Hunter Jin-Woo, it would be very hard to survive. The healer girl then yelled that the sacred defense would only last 5 minutes, no more. Just then, the leader heard a commotion and turned to see the ant general walking toward the dungeon boss. Surprisingly, the boss began to speak in human language. He seemed confused, asking why the king's own soldiers were attacking his army, especially since the king himself had chosen them. But the undead army didn't speak. The dungeon boss couldn't believe what was happening and said he would report it to the king. But the ant general wasn't interested in talking. In a flash, he leapt at the boss and landed a powerful blow that sent the boss flying. As the boss flew back, the ant coldly said, For someone about to die, you talk too much. The dungeon boss, known as the Lord of the Earth, tried to recover, but the ant didn't give him a chance. With overwhelming strength, the ant reached into the boss's chest and ripped out his heart. Without the boss's dark energy keeping them alive, all his undead soldiers collapsed instantly. The hunters who witnessed this were stunned. The ant had defeated both the dungeon boss and the entire undead army in a single attack. No one could believe it. The raid leader looked at the ant, now devouring his defeated enemy, and shouted that he knew the ant was powerful, but not this powerful. Another hunter came up to the leader and joked that with such shadow soldiers, Hunter Jin-Woo didn't even need to lift a finger. His army could clear any dungeon by itself. Thinking about it, the hunter added that Jin-Woo probably only used half his mana to summon them, meaning he had tons of power to spare. After this fight, it was clear that many traditional strategies and gear were useless against this kind of force. Suddenly, one of the hunters suggested to the leader that maybe they should forget their original plan and try to join Jin-Woo's guild. The leader looked uncomfortable and said it felt wrong. After all, merging their respected guild, one of the top 5 in the country, with a new guild built by one powerful hunter didn't sit right. The other hunter laughed and said he was just joking. After today's display, it was obvious that Jin-Woo didn't need them anyway. Still, the leader didn't like the idea and reminded his teammate that even if someone becomes an S-rank hunter, they still have to follow the rules. He explained that dungeon raids require properly assembled teams and that no one, not even Jin-Woo, is above the system. His comrade apologized, but the leader continued, saying that if Jin-Woo could clear entire dungeons on his own, then the rulebook should apply to him too. Everyone knows the rules are there for a reason. But then, his teammates suggested they could support Jin-Woo by supplying men and working together. It would be a win-win. The leader thought about it and realized that while the idea made sense, he also wondered what others would think if they really went through with it. And just then, an idea struck them. They started thinking that maybe they could say they only wanted to support Hunter Jin-Woo, not merge with his guild. Just offer backup. Meanwhile, it had started to rain heavily outside. After the terrifying incident at the school, worried parents gathered at the gates, desperate to know what had happened. Some wept as they saw students being carried out on stretchers. At that time, Hunter Jin-Woo was in a car with the president of the Hunter Association. The president informed him that 213 students had managed to escape safely at the start of the attack. 10 more had been rescued during the chaos. Sadly, the others could have been saved too, if only they had reacted faster. The president handed his phone to Jin-Woo, showing him global statistics from the past 6 months. There had been a sharp increase in dungeon appearances, not just in Korea, but all over the world. The numbers were rising exponentially. But that wasn't the only strange thing. More and more people were coming forward to F-ing out the level of their awakened abilities. And among them, the number of hunters capable of fighting the most powerful monsters was increasing as well. It felt as if some system was trying to maintain a balance between monsters and hunters. Realizing something bigger was going on, Jin-Woo asked about other countries: Japan, the US, China, France, England, Germany, and even Central Asia. The president replied that several countries had already officially requested contact with Jin-Woo, and some had likely done so unofficially as well. He added that the association had no right to stop them. They were only protecting Jin-Woo's information for now, but ultimately everything would depend on his own decision. Still, the president worried if Jin-Woo ever chose to leave Korea, adjusting to a new country might be very difficult under the current global conditions. After this serious talk, they arrived at the hospital, where Jin-Woo's sister was being treated. As he stepped out of the car, the president said the association would try to provide him with whatever he needed. He then asked, could Jin-Woo officially remain in South Korea? So far, there were only 10 registered S-rank hunters, and 3 of them were missing, while 2 had already been killed by monsters abroad, specifically in America. The world couldn't afford to stand by anymore. The president pleaded with Jin-Woo, asking him to at least consider helping shape their country's future this time. Finally, the president asked Jin-Woo directly, what do you really want? Jin-Woo calmly replied, then let me enter the dungeon on top of the mountain, alone. The president was surprised. So, if I understand correctly, you want me to remove the rule about needing a minimum number of people to enter a dungeon? Yes, Jin-Woo confirmed. The president reminded him that this rule was there to keep hunters safe. Every raid was life-threatening. Still, he saw the determination in Jin-Woo's eyes and suddenly understood. The real reason Jin-Woo had created a guild was so that he could clear dungeons by himself. Jin-Woo asked again, "Are you willing to allow this?" After a moment of silence, the president admitted that while it was difficult, it wasn't impossible. And for someone like Jin-Woo, a one-man army, he would do his best to make it happen. Just then, nearby, one of the videographers complimented a reporter, telling her she had done a great job covering the story. She thanked him. Just then, the phone in her hand started ringing. It was her brother. He asked if she wanted to join their guild instead of working quietly in their father's guild department. He wondered why she didn't just come join them and enjoy some freedom, but she couldn't figure out why he suddenly brought it up. She also asked if he knew that Jin-Woo was returning to Korea. Jin-Ho replied that of course he knew. She was his sister after all. The real reason he called was because their guild still needed one more person to complete the team. His sister then accused him of trying to pull her into a guild that wasn't even officially registered yet. She even joked that maybe Jin-Ho had met some shady character trying to scam him. But Jin-Ho insisted that if she knew who that person was, she'd be shocked. She asked who it was. A little later, Jinny stood there with a surprised look on her face. Jin-Ho then introduced her to Swan, his cousin, who was a rank hunter. Swan took off her mask and was just as surprised, realizing that the hunter standing in front of her was Jin-Woo. Jin-Ho asked her why she was surprised. After all, she was a known public figure herself. But Jin-Woo was starting to wonder if this girl really was a hunter. She said she couldn't believe she was face-to-face with the hunter who suddenly appeared at Lee Min-sun's press conference and disappeared right after. Jin-Woo sat down on the couch and began thinking. Jin-Ho was a D-rank hunter and his sister was an A-rank. Maybe hunter powers really were passed down genetically. There seemed to be such cases among siblings. Also, as far as he knew, their father had been a hunter too. Jin-Woo told Swan that he hoped Jin-Ho had already explained things to her. She replied that he had. He told her they needed one more member to form a proper guild. Jin-Woo asked if she was sure she wanted to join, since being in their guild might attract a lot of public attention. But she said it was fine. Anything was better than working under Eugene's son, her own brother, who was famous for his bad temper. Then Swan suddenly asked Jin-Woo if she could take a photo with him for her social media. Meanwhile, the Hunter Association was discussing what Jin-Woo planned to do with the shadow soldiers in the battle team. Jin-Woo understood how serious the situation could get. But even before the guild was officially formed, people were already complaining. He couldn't believe how the association, known for its honesty, was giving him such special treatment. Jin-Woo wasn't happy that the president of the association wasn't saying anything. He wanted him to speak up. Finally, the president admitted that yes, Jin-Woo was getting special treatment. Then he asked Jin-Woo a question. If monsters came out of a dungeon one day, who would he send first? 20 regular hunters or just one? Jin-Woo? Jin-Woo had recently moved into a new apartment in the Hunter Guild area. It cost much more than where he lived before. Someone asked him why he made that choice. When the question was raised, the man started panicking. In the end, he just said he had no comment. Maybe Jin-Woo just wanted to feel a bit safer. The president continued, saying the same thing about the public. When people have a lot of money, they naturally choose the safest place. Right now, guilds from all over the world are trying to recruit Hunter Jin-Woo. If anyone thinks he'll just stay in Korea despite such big offers, the president had to question that belief. He brought up the example of Wang Dong-soo, who left for America, and warned that if people think Jin-Woo's special treatment is unfair, they should remember who will protect them when an S-rank gate opens in Korea. At that very moment, Huntress Cha Hai-in was holding her phone and saw a post on social media. It was that girl posting about her first day in the On Guild. Cha Hai-in couldn't believe what she saw. She was furious, her body started shaking, and her powerful aura flared up. The next day, Hunters Jin-Woo and his partner Jin-Ho stood near the gate. Neither of them had ever seen a gate this huge. Jin-Woo thought to himself that if Jin-Ho had seen a gate like this in a dungeon, he might have passed out from fear. The gate was even bigger than before. Meanwhile, reporters had gathered at the site, shouting questions at Jin-Woo and asking for his thoughts about the On Guild's first raid. They also wanted to know why he named the guild that way and what his connection to founder Yu-chan was. Just then, Officials from the Hunter Association stepped in and helped Jin-Woo escape the crowd. Jin-Woo asked them why there were so many people around. They explained that even though the association tried hard to keep the information hidden, they couldn't prevent the media from finding the dungeon's location. They warned him to be more careful about what he posts online, since that one photo had revealed everything. Suddenly, Jin-Ho asked his mentor how they were going to handle things without crystal mining and how the squads would collect C-class resources. It seemed to him that this would make the process much harder, but Jin-Woo calmly told him not to worry. His shadow soldiers would handle everything instead. A man from the association walked up to the shadow soldiers and started scanning their wounds with a device. He quickly noticed that all of them were high-level and ideal for clearing dungeons. At that moment, he realized how foolish those people had been to doubt the chairman's decision. Once the inspection was finished, the man began removing his suit. He explained he was doing this for safety, so the monsters wouldn't notice him. The director asked him to personally guide and supervise the mission. She also said she'd go along, but only with Jin-Woo's permission. Jin-Woo agreed. Soon after, they were inside the dungeon. Jin-Woo's brother and another association member watched in shock as the Shadow soldiers fought against a powerful rank A monster. The Shadows charged in together, tearing the creature apart. They were not only strong warriors but also skilled mages. Even veteran hunters struggled against monsters like this. But Jin-Woo's shadows attacked in swarms, never giving the enemy a chance. When the man looked toward Commander Igris, he noticed something. This one in particular stood out as incredibly skilled. He was using his cool new sword to launch an attack. And for an ordinary hunter, attacking at that speed would require an extremely high level of magical power. Every swing of his sword released a strong electric charge that destroyed everything in its path. The monsters within range started dying immediately. Then, the observer turned his eyes to Jin-Woo's shadow soldier and realized that the soldier was probably ranked very high, maybe even strong enough to clear the entire dungeon alone. But then, the observer noticed Hunter Jin-Woo again. One of the ants had started eating the fallen monsters. Jin-Woo, annoyed, kicked it hard, and the ant went flying into a wall. Jin-Woo scolded it, saying that those monsters were extremely valuable, and they were wasting them by just eating them. Then he yelled at the other shadow soldiers to stop messing around and get back to work. Otherwise, they wouldn't earn anything. The Hunter Association official realized something. This man could clear a dungeon, gather bodies, and collect mana crystals all by himself. Clearly, this wasn't just a group with a single hunter. Now he fully understood why the chairman had asked him to tag along. Suddenly, the boss monster of the dungeon appeared in front of them. Jin-Woo immediately canceled the summonings of all his warriors, except for the ones meant for mining. The rest of the shadows merged together and returned to Jin-Woo's shadow. The official didn't understand why Jin-Woo did that. He believed they could have easily handled the boss as they were. But Jin-Woo summoned his sword and explained that if he kept depending on his shadows too much, he was worried his own combat skills would get rusty. Right then, he dashed forward at incredible speed and sliced the boss monster into pieces in an instant. Right after, the system notification popped up. The dungeon boss had been defeated. His level increased to 101, and his specialization skill and shadow summoning skill, Guardian of Shadows, Domain of a Monarch, leveled up too. He was shocked to see all his skills rise at once. What surprised him most was the Shadow Swap skill. Its cooldown time dropped from 3 hours to 2 hours. Just one level had reduced it by an entire hour. If he kept moving at this speed, no matter how far the distance, he'd be able to reach his mother and sister at any time. The man from the Hunter Association stood behind Jin-Woo and thought about how the boss of this dungeon used its thick scales as both a shield and a weapon for attacks. Yet Jin-Woo had still managed to pierce it using daggers. What shocked the man even more was seeing Jin-Woo activate his skill to turn the dungeon boss into a shadow soldier. The shadow extraction was a success, and the new shadow's starting level was 13. Jin-Woo looked at it. It was the same rank as his shadow mage, Fangs. Not only that, it looked quite similar to Fangs in appearance. However, this one was much smaller than the original monster, which was unusual since shadows typically don't shrink in size. Still, it gave off powerful magical energy, and Jin-Woo could sense that its magic felt a lot like Fangs. He guessed that maybe, like Fangs, this one could grow larger too. Maybe this small form was just its basic appearance. In any case, It added another strong ally to his army. Now Jin-Woo had to give it a name. He thought about it for a moment, then named it Tusk. The system confirmed the name had been set. Watching from the side, Jin-Ho thought to himself that his mentor wasn't just copying monsters, he was creating powerful shadows from them. Suddenly, the dungeon began to collapse. Everyone realized that since the boss was defeated, the gate would now close, and they needed to get out fast. But Jin-Woo turned his head to check on his new shadow soldier, deciding that he had to move it out quickly. As they exited the dungeon, reporters outside saw a massive orc carrying a giant monster on its shoulder. At first, the reporters panicked. They thought monsters were escaping from the dungeon and began shouting for everyone to run. But a moment later, they realized it wasn't an enemy. It was Hunter Jin-Woo's shadow soldier. The shock turned into amazement. Everyone raised their cameras and began snapping photos of the huge orc, stunned by the fact that Jin-Woo had already cleared such a powerful dungeon. The orc didn't seem to understand at first, but then it started smiling and scratching its big head as the hunters left the dungeon. Jin-Ho, watching this, told his mentor to smile since so many reporters had gathered. They were clearly fascinated by them, even though Jin-Woo didn't want all that attention. The man from the Hunter Association was out of breath after what he had witnessed inside the dungeon. He was clearly shaken and didn't have much to say. A little later, he met with the association's president, who asked him about the raid. This wasn't his first raid, but from the way he spoke, it seemed like even a veteran like him was shocked by what he'd just seen. The man explained that it wasn't just a raid, it was a full-on massacre. The association's president said he understood everything now and that the man could go rest. The man stood up, bowed, and asked for permission to leave. The president agreed, and as he walked toward the window, he reflected on what had happened. Clearing the dungeon, collecting the corpses, and mining crystals. It was clear to him now that this was a one-man operation. The guild, in essence, was just Jin-Woo. He realized that even though the guild might be called a guild, it was really all about Jin-Woo. And while this might seem surprising, Jin-Woo hadn't let Korea down. No, he hadn't failed the world either. The management of hunters was bound to change, but at that moment, in Japan, something strange was happening. In Tokyo, a massive red gate appeared, covering the entire sky. People watching were in shock, unable to understand what they were seeing. The only sound on the streets was a low roar. Inside one of the grand mansions, where power and fear hung in the air, a secret meeting was taking place among the leaders of Japan's top guilds. An important matter was at hand. Suddenly, Ji-Yu, standing near the balcony, noticed people approaching. It turned out that the people entering were the co-owners of the Naked Blade Guild, the servants of the Motor Ranger, and other S-rank hunters. But suddenly, one of them interrupted, calling the other an idiot. It wasn't the co-owner who had arrived, but the leader himself. In the course of recent events, they had lost 7 S-rank hunters, including Goruji, who had been a top prize for the association's head, Masam Masamoto. It was fortunate that they had monopolized all the hunters, but now the Naked Blade Guild was facing its end. If things went well, they could become the strongest guild in Japan, but now things were falling apart. As the hunters heard their words, they turned around, fear creeping onto their faces. Without their leader, they had lost all their confidence and now needed to adjust quickly. A hunter girl began telling her comrade about the rumors that the Amway Guild was trying to absorb the Soulless Guild. Both guilds had 4 orange rank hunters like them. The other hunter replied, questioning if she really believed that merging would make them the strongest in Japan. He found it ridiculous. Even if all the guilds united, it still wouldn't be enough. Later in one of the rooms, a man shouted in frustration. He wanted to know why the association was silent and why an S-rank dungeon had appeared in the middle of it all. He didn't believe that the lack of response from the association was acceptable, and everyone in the room should face the reality of what would happen if monsters emerged from it. The others at the table responded, saying that even if all the S-rank hunters gathered, it still wouldn't be enough to handle an S-rank dungeon. One man suggested that all the national-level hunters be summoned to deal with it. Then a man with a scar on his face spoke up, revealing that he was the Prime Minister. He had gathered the heads of the largest guilds to discuss such foolish questions. He warned that the consequences of ignoring this would be as disastrous as the crack that opened on Shinju Island. Another man at the table asked if he was being so pessimistic and why he wasn't considering hiring Thomas Andre. The other men in the room immediately thought about it and realized that they didn't have enough funds to bring him here. Moreover, the number of mercenaries they could hire was limited due to the growing number of new dungeons. They wondered if there would be any hunters willing to help with such a dangerous S-rank dungeon. Suddenly, one of the men spoke up, mentioning that there was someone who would help, though not for free. It was Yuri Orlov's tank, and they were considering hiring him. Meanwhile, several hundred kilometers away, Jin-Woo was driving his car, reflecting on the fact that he was now level 101. At level 101, he had obtained the key to the Cardin Temple and improved his exceptional skills. He wondered what would happen once he reached level 102. A little later, when he arrived at his destination, he got out of the car and remembered that his deputy had successfully completed everything on his own. It was great that the deputy had so much enthusiasm, but there was still a need to recruit participants. Suddenly, he noticed Hunter Cha walking by and quickly turned around to go in the opposite direction. Jin-Woo, confused, moved toward her and asked why she was running away and what she was doing walking toward their office. She waved her hands with a strange expression and mentioned something about a car in the parking lot. That's when Jin-Woo realized he couldn't get the car because of the shadow exchange. As soon as he turned around, Hunter Cha called out to him, asking if he could spare some time. She seemed to have something on her mind and started asking about a picture on social media. She wondered what the new contestant meant and why she was rejected, especially since her rank was lower than S. She couldn't believe it. Were those two really dating? Suddenly, she spoke again, saying she was there to deliver a message from Hunter Mingbingu about his S rank. Jin-Woo told her to wait, suggesting they could talk about it in the office. Once inside the office, Hunter Cha first asked who was in the office. Jin-Woo explained that his deputy had stayed behind at the scene. Then, he asked what had happened and how Hunter Ming had given her the message. She began to explain that she had heard a voice that day, telling her to relay the message. The voice spoke cautiously, saying that the one who had pulled him from the endless darkness was no longer him. Even though he still had the Raza, he felt like a blind servant, created only for his sake. The voice had brought him indescribable joy, but also frightened him at the same time. She had asked him to pass on these words. After hearing those words, she realized that the man had spoken of a very dangerous and powerful force. He emphasized that she should remember it well, the real Dream Hunter army, and that he himself was the real army.